Welcome to Hospitality on the Rise, the podcast about the people shaping the hospitality industry and their journeys. I'm your host, Alice Cheng, founder and CEO of Culinary Agents, hospitality's go-to hiring platform. And I'm here to give you your dose of virtual mentorship. Here, we'll be sharing the stories, lessons learned, and advice from hospitality leaders who've carved out their own path to success. After all, this industry is where many get their start and go on to do incredible things. Whether you're a pro, starting out, or just love the hustle, this podcast highlights what makes hospitality extraordinary: the people. I'm so excited to have Chef Tyler Akin here with us today. Tyler is a founder of Form Function Hospitality, as well as a chef partner of Bastia and Caletta. He is a well-recognized chef and leader in the organization and resides these days in the Philadelphia area. So we're so excited. Thank you, Tyler, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I usually rattle off some of these things, which I'm going to do now. And then I want to get into how you got started here, but I don't want to gloss over the fact that you were a 2025 featured in Forbes article for Bastia's Tyler Akin on his favorite place to eat in Philadelphia, 2020 Philadelphia Business Journal's 40 Under 40, 2019 Star Chefs Philadelphia Rising Stars and Award winner, as well as several other accolades that we'll get into during the show. But I always like to rewind and hear, how did it all begin? How did you get into this industry?
I had sort of a half step into the industry as a server after college, which I have in recent years become much more, heavily involved in kind of managing and setting standards, et cetera, for front of house. But it was something that I was doing just to make money so I could take a big Southeast Asia trip. you know, uh, Went to a year of law school, did not take, and began dating somebody whose family had pretty deep roots in hospitality out in Chicago and had landed in the Delaware area, managing a country club. And they were just like steeped in it. And I was exposed to it, quite a bit in that context. But really, when I moved to DC with that person, um, I was not entirely sure what I wanted to do. And I started going to these farmers markets where I'd see this guy week after week, setting up these incredible spreads of like artisanal bread and classical French pastries. And I approached him and asked him if I could help him sell the stuff, which quickly turned into, going out to his bakery, which is outside DC, to actually help with production. And I think, like, although that was not hospitality in a restaurant context, what really spoke to me was seeing that closed loop of, producing the product, like selling it hand in hand to people who were often regulars, and frequently hearing like what they had done with the stuff they'd purchased from us the week before. So, like, to me, although the connections with guests these days, you know, largely being in the kitchen when I'm in the restaurant, it can like be a little less direct, like I certainly am out there talking to tables and hearing their feedback, and in large part that's great feedback, and that feels good. I think that just knowing that you've had a hand in creating something that's like bringing people happiness and nourishment is something that really spoke to me. So over time, that path led into restaurants proper, and here I am.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna gloss over that easily because I like to highlight also that, farmers markets seem to be just this magical place where, all the different the ecosystem, if you will, of like restaurants and growers and producers and consumers all kind of come together in a happy place. And so it had an effect on you, and you started moving more into baking and cooking. And then, at what point were you like, this is something that I want to pursue further, or I want to it looked like you then went to school. So something clearly that was the clicking of I want to do this. And then you went to get some further education in it.
Yeah, the guy that I was working for at the bakery, his background was actually as a chef as opposed to like a baker or a pastry chef. this was kind of his like semi-retirement plan, whereas he'd spent an entire career as like a senior chef at the Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia. So that was a place where it was stacked with CIA graduates,
Mhm.
and any downtime you were like tornaying vegetables. You were even as a line cook, you had to know how to carve ice for these elaborate like winter displays that they did. Really old school in that way, and I think because it was like essentially the shadow seat of government during the Cold War. Like if things ever went down, they kind of had an unlimited budget for those bells and whistles, like ice carving. So I think like Wes, that chef, had a catering division to his business where he would do these huge contracts for largely like lobbyists based in DC. And as I got involved in helping him with that, I just found that type of work, actually cooking and executing food to appeal to me more than, being on like a bread shaping bench all day, which over time I found a little bit monotonous. But, Wes like saw this passion forming and a little bit of skill for me and encouraged me strongly to go to culinary school. So I did that, and that was kind of the beginning of my restaurant story.
Yeah, yeah. So culinary school, and then after that, you went back to the DC area to kind of take everything you learned and bring it into some restaurant kitchen, right?
Yeah, so I was really lucky to do my externship, which turned into a longer term job at a restaurant called Komi, which was like a really magical place. It was a tasting menu restaurant with about 40 seats and was like, really had hit its stride, I think in the couple years before I joined the team where, they were year after year being named the number one restaurant in Washington. And, Johnny Moniz, the chef there, was being nominated year after year for the Mid Atlantic Beard Award. And it was just this like kind of mysterious place that didn't, formally allow photography in the dining room. So, finding clues as to what was actually like happening behind those doors was very difficult at that point. And but just kind of reading these like cryptic menus, and although I couldn't afford to eat there at the time, like reading reviews about it and the little bit of press that Johnny had done, because that was not really something he was very interested in doing. It just seemed like a really intriguing place that was doing like very interesting and kind of um the sort of food that spoke to me. So I started dropping my resume off there several times. And in the 11th hour, as I was literally getting off the metro to accept an externship at another place that I was not nearly as excited about, I got a call from like an unknown um, DC number, and it was the sous chef there, who's a friend of mine to this day. Saying, "Hey, we'd love to pick you up for your externship." But I found out later that they had like blacklisted my culinary school because of a bad experience with a previous extern. So this is like kind of a trust fall for them, but it worked out. So
Yeah, and so many kind of little lessons learned nuggets here I'll highlight. And one thing that we hear common is the advice of like if you love it or you enjoy it, go work in it or experience it a little bit
mhm.
before you decide on going to get further education. That may or may not be the path for you. And oftentimes, if somebody recognizes your talent and your passion and encourages you to do that, that's something that we hear pretty often as well. But definitely getting some experience in it and then making
Mhm.
those decisions to not rush into it.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other part that I like to highlight, because it really shows also how times have changed, is when you're doing your research of where you want to work, right?
Mhm.
Because that you need to do your research as well. These days, it's far easier to do the research on finding out, about a particular culture of a place or what they're doing, and then match that with things that you're interested in, what you want to learn, and who you want to learn from, right?
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. I mean, there are so many ways to get behind the curtains for sure these days. Yeah.
I always say, because I'm probably I don't want to date myself. I'm probably older than you, but back then you like sending smoke signals, like you're trying to get, your the attention and try to figure out, what is behind the curtain. So, um, that's great. So got some experience there, and you worked at a couple of different places as line cook, most likely, kind of gathering your different experiences. What led you to Philly?
Yeah, so I was with that group, Johnny and his wife Ann, who operated Komi, and after about 10 years of really just focusing on that restaurant, a space opened up kind of next door and downstairs, and how I was on the opening team of that restaurant, Little Sarah, which is a northeastern Thai restaurant. And honestly, like, I believe that I could have settled into working with that group really truly for the long run, but there were some family circumstances at the time that led me to the decision to be a little bit closer to home in Wilmington, Delaware. So I Philly was like the big city for me growing up. It was obviously a vibrant restaurant scene, and that just became the natural place to live. So on a couple of road trips on my days off from Little Sarah, I was coming up here and just kind of like walking into restaurants and dropping my resume. Johnny had promised to be like a strong reference for me, and with varying degrees of success, I had a couple offers on the table a month later, one of which was to have. And I'd met Mike at the Beard Awards. Like, one of the cool things about Comey is that they would take the line cooks to the Beard Awards. Despite the expense of those tickets, like, it was, which was really cool, like, that early in your career to kind of see like where it could all lead, potentially. And that was a year. One of the years I attended was a year that Mike had was handing out food from Zahav, like um, in the common area of, I guess was it the Lincoln
Yeah,
Center at the time.
I forget.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, so, kind of had, like, some familiarity with him just from that encounter, but, when I walked into Zahav with my resume, like, the first 2 people who looked at it happened to be very aware of what Comey and Little Sarah were, and were like, yeah, it pretty much had an offer on the spot. So, um, yeah, that's how I ended up in Philly, and have more or less been here since.
great, great. And I saw this note here where in 2016 on Billy Penn's 21 people key to continuing Philly's restaurant boom. We're on that. Yeah, Zahav is, one of my favorite restaurants in Philly. It's definitely an institution, and that group has grown tremendously over the years as well. So it must have been a really great, experience as your first kind of foray into Philly's dining scene, which is kind of one of the best in the world. For those of you who have never been to Philly, get there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it gets better all the time, and just when you think like we have all the boxes checked, for like niche cuisines and concepts, somebody comes out with something that is like, wow, I can't believe they thought of that. So, it's really an exciting place to be for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So you spent some time at Zahav. When did you start thinking about, your next thing?
I mean, almost to me, like, when I started, I very entrepreneurially minded, I think, in general. And, I think from the outset, my goal, um, really, like, by the time I went to culinary school, my goal was to try to have a restaurant of my own. And as I, kind of quickly got my bearings and started advancing, that goal shifted to, okay, well, I want to try to do this by the time I'm 30. Arbitrary milestone, but, something to kind of work towards. And, I almost like immediately, having moved to Philly, working at Zahav, I was, spending days off, like, pulling up listings on LoopNet, and, to my detriment, and you live and learn, but like not working with a broker as I would now, but just really kind of like blind shooting, um, spaces, and I found one that, the economics of it made sense, to do something that wasn't going to require me raising a bunch of money. And, so yeah, so yeah, I guess it was like a year and a half into Zahav when I gave a several months notice, um, that I'd be branching out to do my own thing. Yeah.
You know, what was the what when you think back, I'm sure there were a lot of different things, but I would say what would be one of your biggest challenges with kind of breaking out and starting your own thing?
Um, I think it was like, it when you don't have an organization to support an opening, as I clearly did not, it's like apart from the expense, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time. So you effectively have to kind of end your current employment and move into like managing all the work that goes into opening a place, and so there's like a gap where there's no income but there's as much money as possible going out. So that was like that was that was a hard time, and a meager time for sure. And so that was, I think, the hardest part was just kind of making ends meet for that 5 or 6 month period between leaving Zahab and getting my first place open.
Yes, definitely not like a little side hustle project that you work on simultaneously, right?
Yeah, no, it can't
It's like
be.
all consuming.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, you got past that clearly and you got your doors open. What was the next big scary thing?
Next big scare. Well, I guess like opening the second place and then opening the third place. I mean, each one is scary. I remember like, you know, standing out. I kind of raised what was in the scheme of kind of what I'm doing now, like not a huge amount of money, but to me at the time it was quite a bit, and that was to open a second location of one of my concepts, and um, so there was like more on the table than there had been, more pressure, more expectations, and it was my third go round opening a place, and it was like the most harrowing of them all. I was like behind the restaurant, like in the alley, basically crying an hour before the doors opened, and it was all fine in the end. I mean, at least for the year and a half we were able to operate before the pandemic. But yeah, each one is a little bit of a cataclysm in its own right.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, like, does I think this misnomer of like once you open one or you have a couple successes, it becomes easier and easier. I think the answer is like, well, it becomes different.
It
um,
becomes different. Yeah, yeah. The stakes generally go up, and I think in that regard, like while you may have more resources, you may have more experience, you may have more team members around you to help with the lift, it's like the stakes generally keep getting higher and higher.
yep, yep. Expectations, pressure, different evolution of success, right? Great. And so take me to kind of where you are now and what's next.
I've been very focused on these spots at Hotel Annabelle in Philadelphia over the past year. Bastia, which is our restaurant, in Caletta, which is our bar, and kind of has its own food menu and cocktail menu. Um, has and I think it's been good to have been really focused on that because we had a great first year. um, just stepped away from another hotel project that I'd been involved in for the last 5 years down in Delaware. And all along, I do work, quietly, supporting other restaurants, especially in the hotel space that, for one reason or another does not like turn into, this is like a form function or a Tyler Akin restaurant. So I stay busy and have my hands in a few things, but Bastia has really been something I like wanted to nail and have been focused on. So
Yeah.
Um,
How do you manage juggling all these different, right? Because you can be the headliner on some things, you can be kind of support for some others, but but all of it requires, pieces of you, and switching costs typically are high in general. And I don't know you that well, but I know you have a life and
I try.
other other obligations. Um, but yeah, what are the tips and tricks?
Yeah, I don't really have any apart from, at a certain point, you have to come to peace. You have to be at peace with the idea that like the restaurant is going to run without you. And that's, especially in the hotel context where you essentially have to be continuously open. Um, we have 19 meal periods a week. We're breakfast, lunch, dinner, Monday to Friday. We're brunch, dinner, Saturday, Sunday, and that does not even take into account Caletta, the bar or poolside food and beverage service that we're doing. So all of that is to say that, I think like the bigger the things get and the more ambitious they are, the more well capitalized they are, like you have an ability to build a proper management team, which when I had like a small constellation of little spots, like you know, I I couldn't afford proper management, and that has been a blessing for me because there's a group of people that I implicitly trust, who are here on the nights that I'm able to be with my family, um, who can kind of execute what we all know needs to be done. So
Yeah, and that's a common, leadership journey in general. You get to a point where you're like, okay, I have the right people, I trust them. I can actually either focus my time and energy on something else, work related or not work related, and trust that whatever has been built and what you set the right structure and path and processes or whatever, and you trust the people that are there to continue them. That can be easier for some than others. Feel like a lot of people in this industry tend to have a little bit of control freakness, which is great. And I would say high standards and all those things that make, you know, great restaurants and talented people and teams. So I'm happy for you because I feel like that tends to be kind of a big deal when you get to a point where you're like, I can breathe a little bit.
yeah.
And I've got the right team in place. I know we went down that journey as well.
Mhm.
And then you start thinking about your next projects, right?
Always. Always. I would not say I'm like addicted to opening restaurants, and I think that is an affliction that's common. Um, but I'm certainly always looking and listening.
Yeah. So I have a question. I'm kind of curious. I'm going to go off the cuff here because I do hear this often when I'm talking to people about what they want to do and what they're seeing themselves doing. Is what would you say are the biggest differences between running like restaurants, independent restaurants, or a restaurant group, and working as a hotel partner or working in hotels? Like for somebody who's like, I want to open a restaurant in a hotel. Do you have like
Mhm.
one or two like FYIs?
Um, yeah, sure, a couple. I mean, one, you have to if you're the kind of person who considers their food to be like sacred, like the manner in which it is plated and whether certain components can be omitted or whether it is only taken to a table in the dining room versus a room upstairs, like if that's going to be a deal breaker, it's probably not for you. And to be honest, I've worked for chefs, I think, who would not entertain that kind of situation, and I respect that position, and I think that that had sort of passed on to me, like the idea that this is the dish, take it or leave it. Like we're here, we'll tell you what allergens are in this dish, but it is what it is, and if you can't have it, you can't have it. I think like what I have learned to become, and as I've settled into it, I have grown to like really appreciate it and embrace it as a part of my chef identity, is like being a yes, operating a yes restaurant. And we refer to that in lineups when we talk about, what we're trying to convey to guests. Like we are here to accommodate our guests to the greatest extent possible. If that means, substituting one sauce for another that, are proximate enough for the dish to still be good, then we'll do that, and it's like it's not going to make me lose sleep that somebody had salsa verde instead of pesto, on their trophy A or something like that, So I think if you're not built constitutionally to kind of like be super accommodating and flexible, um, it's just not going to be a good fit. Um, and there's some exceptions, there's certainly hotel restaurants that can operate in like a very fine dining sort of mode, that can remain no restaurants and still get by. But if you're kind of the main F&B outlet, in a hotel, it's just not possible to be that way. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's not for everyone. It's not for
no.
everyone. But, what is great is as the industry has evolved in general, you see a lot more of this kind of collaboration, experimentation with different brands coming together and it works sometimes and it works
Mhm.
beautifully and that turns into something else. And sometimes it doesn't though.
Yeah, for sure.
We now operate in a world of like, let's be flexible. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Um, but excited for you. Congratulations. It sounds like you have a lot of fun things happening and you fulfilled a lot of your aspirations of entrepreneurship. I mean, this industry, I feel like restaurant owners and chefs and restaurateurs are everyone's entrepreneurial. Like you go through very similar, if not the same, challenges as any other business starting in a different industry.
Yeah.
Like lack of resources, like endless stress, and all that good stuff. And at the end of the day, the passion and the dedication kind of drives you past the initial, and then before you know it, you're ready for the next one. Right? You're up for more of the beautiful punishment. I'll say no.
Yeah. I like
But,
that. Yeah.
on that note, I'm gonna go to quick fire.
Okay.
What advice would you tell your younger self?
I mean, I would tell myself to go get a job in a kitchen. I had like somewhat of a late start, I would say. I encountered cooks who've come to work in my restaurants that, kind of like knew at age 16, that's what they wanted to do. They went straight to CIA or Johnson and Wales. And I look at them and they're 21, 22, and I'm like, you're gonna be a sous chef in a year or two. We just promoted, a young cook here at Bastia who he's now a junior sous chef and he's only a couple of years out of CIA, but he had like the traits that we needed, and whereas I was not cooking professionally, until in a restaurant context, like until my mid 20s, so I would tell myself to go cook food somewhere.
What advice would you give to someone starting in the industry?
You should aim to be the first one in and the last one out. I know that the culture has shifted, certainly on, working off the clock. It's not kind of an open-ended arrangement anymore like the old days where we worked for shift pay and it was like, you need to be here as long as it takes to get the work done and then the kitchen clean at the end of the night. But I think, to the extent that it's possible, trying to log some extra hours to learn new things is like really invaluable. There was a friend of mine, Akira Akudo, um, who most recently had Combi in LA. Like he was doing some interviews and putting up some Instagram stories during the pandemic that I thought were really, insightful, and I agreed with them in large part. And they were along the lines of, if you're not, if work life balance is like your north star as opposed to professional development, you're going to shortchange your professional growth. And arguably, if you kind of extrapolate how that prioritization, serves your career over time, you may be setting back like how soon you may be ready to operate a restaurant, because there's nobody operating a restaurant that is working 40 hours a week, so the sooner you can get accustomed to actually, doing the hard, long work that comes with operating restaurants, I think it acclimates you to what the reality is going to be.
Yeah, yeah. I hear I like to say work life harmony. It's like you kind of figure out at the end of the day how the pieces just fit together,
Yeah,
and make adjustments as needed. But the balance thing is, it's like it's not going to be equal parts. I mean, it's hard to make it equal parts, and
it is.
if that's the goal, then you might be missing the point.
Yes.
What's your advice for someone struggling in the industry?
There are some common struggles, whether they're mental health or substance abuse, financial challenges. I think on the first and third points, at least, like the mental health, and obviously that's tied to substance use, but economic challenges. I would encourage people to look up the organization Southern Smoke, which does a ton of good work in that space. Supporting people from dishwashers to executive chefs and general managers, kind of stabilize their well-being in their lives, so that they can get back on track. You know, Otherwise, I think consulting friends and colleagues and mentors about what sort of support resources might be in the community, or in even in the network of healthcare coverage that your employer may offer. Don't be afraid to seek help. There have been long periods of time during my career that I have been in therapy, and it's been invaluable for me. So
What's your advice for fellow hospitality leaders?
I think that we often paint, yeah, because hospitality leaders are often a little bit older, like myself. There are obviously exceptions, people who are just prodigious and kind of get to the top very quickly. But there's a lot of conversation about like kids these days and like the work ethic of the new generation. And, I think that it can be dehumanizing. It can like really undermine your ability to arrive at solutions to whatever issue you're addressing in your own workplace culture or with a particular employee. So I think like resisting that urge to paint with a broad brush. There are always exceptions, and frequently, the exceptions are more common than the actual examples of that thing. So in my mind, like it really helps to reset my thinking sometimes and just like zero in on what the issue is, and not trying to expand it to some kind of generalization about how people are now.
Yeah, yeah, we definitely have concluded in general that in the kitchen and the restaurant or this hospitality world is multi-generational, and you have people who are just starting out working alongside people who have been doing it for 15, 20, 30 years,
Hmm.
and having everybody come together to be effective and efficient, um, is a challenge in and of itself. So that's something I think in general leaders are always trying to figure out different ways and new ways and getting advice from each other on how to continue to do that. So,
Yeah.
on that note, Tyler, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing
Thank you.
your career timeline and exciting things you're working with. I also 100% agree with you. Southern Smoke Foundation is a wonderful organization, and we also support them as well. So excited to see you at festival in a couple weeks, and congrats on everything.
Remember, success looks different for everyone in hospitality. No two paths are the same. If you have a leader or a topic you want to hear about, email media@culinaryagents.com. Hospitality on the Rise is brought to you by Culinary Agents, connecting top talent with employers since 2012. Whether you're hiring or looking for your next opportunity, join us at culinaryagents.com. For more inspiration, subscribe to Hospitality on the Rise and visit hospitalitycareerpaths.com, a free platform by Culinary Agents. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. And if you love this episode, share it with someone who could use a little inspiration.